This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey friends, we are celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Rural Women Podcast this year, and we are taking a look back through the inspiring stories that have been shared with us throughout the years. Looking back through these interviews, there are women who have been successful, who have persevered, and who have been resilient. There are women who have shared their stories who may not farm or ranch or homestead or work in the business that they used to. Things may be different for them now, but I know their stories have impact. And I hope that this is a solid reminder for those of you who have shared your stories or who are inspired to share your stories. Our stories are forever changing. And just because we may not farm, ranch, or homestead the same, our lives might not look the same. There has been growth here. Through the good, the bad, and the ugly, I think it's a solid reminder for all of us to look back to see how far we've come. So my friends, I hope you enjoy these throwback podcast episodes coming your way, and thank you for being here and for helping me celebrate the incredible stories of women in agriculture through the Rural Woman Podcast over the last 5 years. Enjoy. This week, you'll meet Ashley Constance.
My name is Ashley, and I did not grow up in the country. I grew up in the city between Calgary, Alberta, and Kelowna, BC, and was a typical city kid. 2 parents who worked normal jobs. I went to public school and never put much thought into anything to do with where my food comes from or how it's grown or anything like that. And then in my mid-20s, I was kind of going through some stuff in my personal life that was kind of difficult and decided that I wanted to take a little bit more control over what I was eating and how my food was being prepared. So I decided to dive headfirst into gardening. And that's kind of where it all started.
Tell us about your now homestead and where you've moved and what you are producing there.
For sure. So it does look a lot different now. The biggest thing, like I always joke that the reason we moved out of the city is because I couldn't have chickens in the city. I'm obsessed with my chickens. So this whole conversation of, let's move to an acreage so I can get chickens. And then from there, obviously a lot more happened. So we moved out to this property in March of 2020, but it really did take us about 2 years to find the right property. Once we kind of had our minds set on, okay, we actually want to do this. We searched for a very long time. We looked in BC, we looked in Nova Scotia, and we looked in Alberta. And I'm actually really glad that we stayed in Alberta because all of our people are here, but we were open to pretty much anything. There was pros and cons to every different area that we looked, but we ended up finding this little property. And It's 3 acres. It's not huge, but we're just 2 people. We don't have kids. We've got a dog, cat, and a gaggle of creatures. And when we pulled into this property, I knew this was the one. It was flat. There was trees, like there was so much usable land. It was a blank slate. There was nothing here. There was no garden. There was no chicken coop. There was nothing. So we moved in on, I think it was like 5 days after the global pandemic was declared. So that was a really interesting time to be moving. And I actually see that now as a good thing, because just how we were all feeling in that time, there was this like, okay, get going, like move in, do not waste time. Like I had my laying hens ordered before we even took possession. I had my garden seeds ordered. Like I was ready to hit the ground running as soon as we got here. And that first year, we really did just go for it. We built 3 big raised beds. We dug an in-ground garden. We got our chickens. We got the coop. We started doing like rainwater catchment and composting and all of that. And that first year was just insane. Like we had never gardened on that scale before. We had never had chickens. I had never even touched a chicken until I had my own. And very quickly we realized like this land can feed us. We were producing so much out of our garden alone. And we were obviously doing a lot of canning and preserving and dehydrating. And then our chickens started laying eggs. And that was just like magical. I bawled my eyes out the first day that I found an egg. I was so excited. And that first year was like, it was baptism by fire for sure. But it was also like one of the most inspiring summers of our lives. We just couldn't believe what we were producing.
This week, you'll meet Kelly Worthington.
My name is Kelly Worthington, and I am co-owner of Whispering Wind Farms. We are located just north of Calgary, Alberta. We started our farm as a grass-fed Galloway beef operation. And then just over 5 years ago, we decided to get into Kuni pasture pork. So now our program is based mainly on the Kuni pasture pork and our Galloway grass-fed beef.
With the Galloways, we had kind of been chatting before we hit record here, is because of the double coat, these are cattle that you don't often see in a setting like a feedlot. Tell us more about that. And I just find it interesting because I myself live in an area that is very heavily populated with feedlots, and I don't get to see Galloways very much or at all. So tell me about that and why that is.
So because Galloways have a double coat, feedlots don't like them because of the tag that gets on their coat. So that's like the dirt, the manure that gets all stuck to their hair. So when they take the animals to the packers dock them. So they lose money. So if you've got to take Galloway calves or even Highlands, like if you take them to the auction, you get dinged like quite significantly, about half. It could be potentially half the cost of what your other breeds are, because they're going to get dinged in the end. So if you're looking at doing grass-fed beef and you really want a great animal, the Galloways are perfect for it. If you're looking to sell your calves at the auction, it could come and hurt you. So they're really a great animal for a direct market and not auction.
Well, it even sounds with their meat quality and the marbling, it sounds like it's more of a specialty meat anyways. That would be much more reasonable to do at a direct market versus selling to whoever at a packer and that kind of thing. So
yeah, and we've heard they like the animals and they like that they finish, but yeah, they'll nail you on that coat. So even we find even with the calves or even the cows in the summer, as soon as they slick out, they're really good about slicking out. As soon as the sun hours start changing, you can almost see them hair up instantly. They get that coat growing pretty quick. So if you're going to send calves to the auction, you got to send them sooner than later, because by December, they're pretty shaggy looking.
Yeah, but they're so cute, those Oreo cookie cows. This week, you'll meet Kendal Van Hall.
Well, my start in agriculture would have definitely been just doing chores as a young child in my parents' feedlot, which is mostly just shoveling feed bunks and picking rocks, as many farm kids get to experience. But then I graduated high school and I went to Olds College, and I actually took the horticulture program and the landscaping program and wanted initially to go into greenhouses, but that didn't pan out. And my husband and I now farm in the Eastern Irrigation District in Alberta, Southern Alberta. And yeah, got our start, I don't know, just asking around, and we found some rented ground. And I think the first year we ever farmed, we grew wheat and canola. And then every year after that, it feels like I have a new crop to learn about, whether it's flax or doing seed canola and under irrigation. And it's just, I guess that's my start initially. And I bought my first bit of cattle in 2014 and kind of learn on the fly and keep on going. And that's kind of my start, I guess.
Yeah, you were basically born into the gig, and your dad obviously had some great after-school help. So when you're not working on your farm, you are working off of your farm at your parents' feedlot. So tell us more about that and your parents' operation.
Yeah, so my parents run a small feedlot finishing yard for steers, and we take them to finish. And then we're lucky in Alberta to have the 2 local packing plants within Alberta. And most of my time is spent just doing general maintenance and driving the feed truck. I am the feed truck driver, which is great. I get to listen to many a rural woman's podcast. And pretty much I check pens, I do cattle things, I fix a lot of fence, I pick up a lot of garbage, I, work in the bins, I get to shovel a lot of grain bins. And it's just the basic day-to-day chores. That's kind of what my role is. And it works out well because I can manage, you can do a lot of emails from a feed truck. You can make a lot of phone calls from a feed truck. So it's kind of been great in the sense that you can, and with it being my family's farm, that they can understand the balance of it. So if say a pivot breaks down or you need to be somewhere to hook something up somewhere else, you can just manage the feedlot on your own because I'm doing all the chores, I guess I should say, and get the jobs done. So it's been people don't like doing chores, but chores is some of the best part of the working with my family in our small feed yard, essentially. So, yeah.
That's great. This week, you'll meet Celeste Lopeiato.
Yeah, so my name's Celeste Lopeiato, and I own the Conscious Kitchen mainly, while also doing a few other things. And how I got started in agriculture. So I didn't grow up in agriculture. I grew up in Toronto, Ontario. So pretty big city. We didn't have a backyard or anything. I was kind of, exposed a little bit to agriculture from my grandparents. They had like a garden in their backyard growing up. But other than that, we didn't really eat locally. We never went to like farms in the country and just didn't really have that kind of be part of our life when I was a kid. But eventually I decided to try to go to vet school. So I was going to the University of Guelph for like a pre-vet program, and somehow learned that there was like an organic vegetable farm on campus. And I was looking for a summer job. I think it was my second year of university, and they happened to be hiring. So I applied, and I'm not really sure why. I think I just wanted to work outside and kind of just work in like a different kind of place. So I somehow got the job because I convinced her that I knew what I was doing or that I was interested in agriculture, but really I didn't know anything. And then kind of the first week just being on the farm, I really fell in love. We were just doing a lot of different things like seeding and preparing beds, and just looking at the perennial plants that were from last year and just all of that stuff, and just really fell in love with the whole process. And it was a 3-acre organic vegetable farm, and we really grew kind of all the crops. We also had coop houses and a greenhouse. So it was really learning start to finish how to grow things in a farmer's market kind of setting.
Tell us more about the Conscious Kitchen and how that all started for you.
Yeah, so it kind of started a bit out of the blue. Again, I never imagined, starting my own business, and I didn't have that many entrepreneurs in my family, so it wasn't really an idea I thought about. But after graduating university, there just weren't a lot of job prospects. I was just applying to jobs, not really getting interviews or getting interviews and then, not getting the job, or it was too low paying. So I was kind of just, thinking about what my next steps were, and kind of still just, applying to random jobs in the nonprofit sector, somehow related to like food or food security or agriculture in some way. And then I started actually cooking for a friend kind of in the evenings as a meal prep. And it was just kind of serendipitous. She was looking for someone to help her out. And I was just looking for some more creative outlets and a way to make extra money. So I decided to start doing that. And then after a few months, I had a few of her friends also ordering from me. So I was cooking for about 3 or 4 families a week in the evenings or on Sundays. And yeah, just kind of figuring out if that could be like a possible business idea and just kind of fleshing it out. And I eventually actually found a commercial kitchen for rent, and it was pretty affordable if I was going to share it with another business. So I decided to ask another female business owner. She made like vegan cheese, if she'd be interested in sharing it. And she said yes. So we kind of signed the lease and both figured out, what we were doing. And at that point, I decided I was going to start kind of like a zero waste meal delivery and grocery business. And that was just kind of building off what I was already doing and, thinking a bit more about what I wanted to do in the future. And zero waste was becoming kind of really popular at that point. So this would have been middle of or early 2019. So zero waste is a big thing. Meal delivery was starting to become popular, like the HelloFresh and things like that. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to offer, the same thing in a more environmentally friendly, sustainable, local way. And I kind of took off from there.
This week, you'll meet Simone Weinstein.
My name is Simone. I use they, them pronouns. And my partner, Celeste, and I, we live in Ontario, Canada on Soggy Ojibwe Nation territory. And we moved up to where we are now, our 5-acre rural property, about a year and a half ago. We were living in kind of like a medium-sized city for a few years. Celeste just finished undergrad studying environmental governance. I was working at a food sustainability consulting company. And so we both kind of had experience working in and I guess supporting like food and agriculture companies. So she had been interning on organic farms and working in bakeries and food banks. And then I was kind of just on, like the consulting side of food and ag. So we had that similar and like shared passion. And she started her farm to table food business about a year after graduating. And that was really inspired by the idea of sourcing from local kind of family run farms who we'd be getting our CSAs, community shared agriculture, from for a few years. And so we had a lot of connections with local farmers. We weren't necessarily farming on our own because we were living in the city, but pretty connected to that kind of world.
Let's talk about the conference that you and Celeste hosted this past winter. The conference itself was something that like my eyes immediately went to because I was like, oh, this sounds spicy. It was called Not Your Father's Farm Conference. So immediately I was like, well, that sounds like something for me. So tell us the idea or how the idea came about for you to host such a conference.
I think, we definitely wanted to make it a little spicy, right? And to catch attention. So it basically, the idea was inspired after, for a few years, Celeste in particular had been attending a lot of farming conferences and just felt that I guess most of the speakers looked a certain way. Maybe I guess I can name, there was like a lot of white men talking about farming. And then it was like the people of color, the women of color were kind of designated to talk about like race or racism in farming. So just, wanted to create something that centered all of like the brilliant women, trans, non-binary voices that are in the farming space that perhaps didn't get centered in those conferences. Although I think definitely there has been a lot of improvement in diversity in farming conferences overall. But I think in centering, I guess, like women, trans, non-binary folks, and then with special, I guess, focus on like BIPOC and queer, I think, there's something about creating that space that it's almost like you come into it having to explain one less thing or having to like justify or prove one less thing about why you're here and why people should listen to you, right? And why you're an expert.
You can help support the stories of women in agriculture to be shared through the Rural Woman podcast on Patreon. What is Patreon? It's a membership-based platform that helps fund and support creators like me to create and produce content like this that you all love. New to the Rural Woman podcast Patreon is ad-free listening and patron-only bonus content and exclusive episodes. Learn more and join the patron gang today at patreon.com/The Rural Woman Podcast. This week, you'll meet Deanne Chuiko.
Well, I guess I got my start in agriculture because I fell for the farm boy. John and I have been together for a long time. I think I was in grade 11 when we started dating. So that would be my start in agriculture. I was the town kid. Always dreamt of, having a horse and thinking my parents should buy the empty lot next door to put it in. But, that obviously doesn't happen. So, starting dating John gave me my first taste of ranch life. And I'd say it maybe took me a little while to completely warm up to everything. When you're first new in, everything is, pretty new and exciting. But there were some struggles along the way. I think when we first got married, it was right after the drought of 2002. It was right after BSE. So the beginning part of our marriage was commuting ranching. So we were living in a couple different communities and trying to jam in cow work on days off. And you get working full time and small kids, and that gets fairly difficult, I think, or busy. So in order to combat that, we decided we were going to buy a camper and have our family time and our cow time at the same time. Otherwise, John was working in the oil field, commuting, and then going out to the cows, and I'm home with little kids, and we don't really get to see him. So we thought, well, let's go out there with him. So we bought a camper, and we started camping as we were calving cows in the beginning of May, and that has been some of the best family time we have ever had.
Before I even ask you about that, for the listeners who may not be familiar with what holistic management is, can you give us a bird's eye overview of what holistic management actually even is?
Well, I guess for me, it's a decision-making framework, and it looks at three things: your people, your finances, and land and livestock. So real big emphasis on people, setting that goal, looking at what you want your quality of life to look like. And, so everybody on your management team is on that same page. You've got that guiding star that's, kind of helping you in all the decisions that you make. And then, of course, the financial part of it, we really needed help in, budgeting and doing a financial plan for like, what does this look like when we're going to get, a cattle loan and big numbers, right? So we needed help in that aspect. And then, of course, we just hook, line, and sinkered on the grazing part, like the holistic plan grazing. I think we took the course in 2016, and that summer would have been the first summer that we did like planned grazing, where we're moving daily or more as we can and building temporary fence. And that has been like a big part for us, for sure. We love that. We really enjoy the grazing part of it, but everything that holistic management has given us and the people we met have just been amazing. So definitely, yeah, highly recommend and definitely added to our life.
This week, you'll meet Marina Schmidt.
So my name is Marina. I grew up in a very small town in southwestern Ontario, was not linked to agricultural at all. I moved 3 hours away after college, didn't know anyone, just had a fresh start for my job as an x-ray tech. And then I met my husband on eHarmony because how else do two workaholics meet? And 2019 came and I got married and moved to my husband's family farm that he grew up on. And I have just been learning ever since, making lots of mistakes, getting my husband to laugh at me constantly. And it's been a journey. We have 14 cows. We do a very small cow-calf operation here. And then we do some cash crop. We plant soybeans, wheat, hay, corn, and occasionally barley. And then on top of that, my husband and his brother run a wrapping and baling business. So I do help out with that, not a whole lot, but my job is mostly feeding them during that entire busy season from June to October, I think it went to this year. And then add in an x-ray job still. I work part-time. And then a teeny tiny baby we brought to the farm 2021. It's hectic, but we love it.
So take us back to 2019. You were getting married, you moved to the farm. What was your initial reaction to that? How did you begin to settle into the farm?
I had been around when we were dating, but it was just a lot of tractor rides, and I had been helping here and there. But yeah, living here, being thrown right into it, it was a lot, and I wanted to help as much as I could. And Jake patiently has been teaching me every piece of equipment. I haven't learned every piece of equipment, but we are getting there very slowly. But oh man, it's crazy how many hours these farmers put in just blew my mind. And I have never talked about the weather so much in my entire life, and I have since getting married.
That's basically the dinner conversation is, half of it is about the weather sometimes.
Yeah, pretty much. And I was so used to making plans, doing stuff in the summer, and knowing what my day was going to look like. And if I'm not at work that day, I'm always asking Jake, well, what are we doing today? And he's like, well, we'll have to see what happens, who calls, what breaks down. If the ground's ready, it's definitely been a different shift of mindset for me.
This week, you'll meet Hannah Konschuh.
So my name is Hannah Konschuh. I run a grain farm called Generation Land and Grain Company Limited in southern Alberta. If you looked at a map of southern Alberta, we're right smack in the middle of Calgary and Medicine Hat. So we're a dryland grain farm. We grow wheat, peas, barley, and canola. And I had some big plans to try one new crop this year, but I think I might be holding off on that just based on some of the growing conditions that we're seeing. But my start in agriculture didn't really happen it wasn't even really on the radar for me until I was in my mid-20s. So I was working in Saskatoon, actually. That's where I went to school. And I was finishing up a contract with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in a research position. And I think my parents identified that I was kind of at a place where I was thinking about next steps. And so really it just came down to a phone call with them where they asked me if I was interested in coming back to the farm in Alberta. And so, yeah, the rest is basically history. That's kind of how it all happened for me.
You have done a lot of things in your agriculture career. And when I was reading about you and coming up with my questions, I fangirled a little bit because I don't think I realized that you were the first woman to serve on the board of the Alberta Wheat Commission. So tell me what that experience was like for you, being the first woman to do that, as well as what drove you to make that decision that you wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah, I was the first woman to serve on that board, but I feel like I should qualify it a little by saying that that organization started when the wheat board was dismantled. So around 2012. So still is a relatively, young organization, but it still feels like something that we should recognize because it is the lack of women in leadership positions, especially on primary producer run organizations. It's still an issue. And now that I've served on that board and termed out, the issue still exists. So it's something that's the topic of gender diversity in leadership positions in our sector is something that is, very near and dear to my heart. So the reason that I sort of had a connection to that organization is, of course, because I filled a contract position there. And so then I went full-time farming. And so because of that connection, those people knew me. They thought, oh, hey, well, Hannah's a farmer. She knows what we're all about. She can serve on this board. And so I put my name in the hat and I, ran for the leadership position in Region 2 and was elected. And yeah, I'm so glad I did that. It's such a thankless job. I mean, of course, there's per diems and you are compensated for your travel and for all the things you participate in, but there's such a vital amount of work that goes on behind the scenes in these organizations. Of course, they're managing checkoff dollars and filtering that money into so many important programs like market development, and research is a huge one, and policy, working with policymakers, so many important things that affect farmers. So yeah, I look back on it and there were so many things I learned and so many great people I got to meet. But like most things in life, there was also some really challenging conversations and challenging moments that I had, especially once I realized that one of the key things for me was thinking about who is doing the leading. So who is at the table and who is making decisions. So while I'm so glad I did it, there's definitely some things I hope for in the future when it comes to how these organizations are doing their own succession planning and transition planning and thinking about who is doing the leading and who's at the table.
This week, you'll meet Natasha McCrary.
I'm excited to say that this year is 10 years for us at our farm, which is 1818 Farms. And we're located in northern Alabama. And really, my life took a lot of different turns. I had a background in business. So, I did grow up, my family, we grew all of our food. What I tell people is, you grew what you were going to eat. You put everything up. So I did have exposure to growing things. But then once my kids became where they were all going to be in school, and I really wanted to do a family building exercise where I could show them how to start with a business idea, and which was going to be our farm, because we are in agriculture. We breed the Southdown baby doll sheep. And when we first started, we did a lot of produce. And now we're primarily a cut flower farm. So we have agritourism and a lot of education. But really, it's funny how to say I'm here 10 years later. Had you asked me 10 years ago, would I be here? I really just wanted to show my children, about conservation, appreciating outdoor, being great stewards of the land, and really just creating something as a family to teach them about a business. And, we have gone through turns and here and there, and that's sort of just how we ended up here and I always loved the outdoors, loved, being outside, and the thought that you can take one little seed and what you can produce from that, to me, is just amazing what you can produce from. It's like a miracle is what I tell people, that you have this. So that's kind of how we started, and just kind of done a lot of different things over the years.
I want to switch gears and talk more about the flowers on your farm. So you talked about how you started with produce, but have eventually moved to just flowers. What was the decision behind that, of changing from food to flowers?
Yeah, there's several things. Number one is we can really extend our season to 12 months with flowers. And you're probably like, what? I mean, you don't have a frost? We do. However, we dry flowers quite a bit. Like in a harvest day, we're going to be harvesting for fresh cuts, and we're harvesting for dried. The misconception in dried, and I have a video on our YouTube channel, and we can talk about that, is, I had a bouquet. I received a bouquet. It's 7 days old. I'm going to dry it and preserve it. You're not going to get the great, beautiful flowers we harvest that as though I would be sending it to you to go in your home. Like we know exactly how to maintain the color and the quality of flower. So that allows us a revenue stream almost 12 months a year. The second thing is in farmers markets here, where our farm is, we are backed up to the Wheeler Wildlife Refuge, and it became a constant battle with raccoons, possums. Like you'd have 300 beautiful heirloom tomato bushes, and in the night they would come and they would take a bite out of one tomato from every bush. I'm sure people out there are like, oh yes, I've had that happen. Or you have a whole crop of popcorn, and in one night they come and destroy everything. So that was one. I just was tired of battling the critters because, you're you're at a wildlife refuge. There's really not a lot you can do.
This week, you'll meet Chelsie Boles.
Well, my name is Chelsie Boles, and I am a first-generation farmer. My husband and I got into this from zero experience. We started our farm roughly 9 years ago now, and neither of us came from farming backgrounds. We both did grow up in rural America, though, not too far from where our farm is, actually. And we embarked on this journey because I had a lot of health problems, and we discovered the work of the Weston A. Price Foundation and Joel Salatin, sort of at the same time. And that started this really crazy adventure to get into buying food, sourcing food, figuring out what made us feel good and how I could support my immune system. All the issues that I had with my health seemed to stem from what I was eating, even though I didn't know that prior to learning about it.
You are a relatively young person. So to have health issues at such a young age, it can be really kind of scary to think that this is, the foreseeable future for you. What were some of the warning signs or the telltale signs that for you, it was the food that you were eating that was not making you feel well?
That actually started when I was young. When I was in high school, I had to do the awful glucose test because I was having a lot of headaches, chronic fatigue. That word wasn't used back then, but that's something that most people are familiar with now. And the blood test came back that I had hypoglycemia. And basically I got a printout that said, eat lots of vegetables, make sure your grains are whole, and eat lean meat. And that was it. And I tried it and it didn't work and I abandoned it. And then fast forward to college, it was so bad. I would fall asleep in class. It didn't matter how much I slept. And I did not think it was food until well after I got into a car accident. Actually, I fell asleep driving to the gym. 5:00 in the evening, I had been well rested, like you would think. And I fell asleep, drove up a light pole and crashed, flipped the car over. And thankfully, nobody was hurt, myself included. No other cars were involved. And after that accident, I was like, there's got to be something going on here more than, So I did, all the tests. And basically, the only thing that the conventional system could come back with for me was, you probably have narcolepsy, because I tested positive for a gene that basically you can have narcolepsy if you have the gene, but it doesn't mean that you have it. So after meeting my husband, and him at the time we were just dating, he brought home this book by Mark Sisson called The Primal Blueprint. And he was like, I really think we should look into this. And I'm like, there's no way that this is food related. And then when we started looking into the Primal Blueprint, this whole other world came out in front of me that I just had no idea. And then we started implementing some of these crazy, at the time, concepts to me. And it was pretty immediate. how quickly I started to feel different, better, more energized, which then that was shortly after we had already bought our farm. So we kind of jumped from like doing better and then learning all these things and really diving into the nutrition world and the farming world and then newlyweds and then let's throw a baby in there. So that all kind of happened over the course of like probably 2 years.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.